If you're ready to see how deep it goes, you found the right place. Pour your tea. You're not late for office hours. And now, our Red Queen, Tarah Wheeler.
It is lovely to see you folks again. Hello, I'm Tarah, and it's great to be back in this community every single week, getting a chance to help out, talk with people experiencing all of the fun of the world of small business cybersecurity and the managed service providers that love and care for them. I've got a special treat for us today. Today, I've got Phil Reitinger, a mentor, just an incredible human being and a colleague who is today going to get a chance to talk with us about the Global Cyber Alliance. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Phil. Phil Reitinger has served as the president and CEO of the Global Cyber Alliance since December 2015. GCA is an international nonprofit organization headquartered in New York City and London that is focused on eradicating systemic cybersecurity risks. GCA doesn't prepare reports and recommendations. Instead, it works with its 150 partners around the world to implement solutions that measurably reduce cyber risks, like phishing. In the private sector, Mr. Reitinger served as Sony's Senior Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer from September 2011 to September 2014. Probably got some stories there. And Phil was also the Chief Trustworthy Infrastructure Strategist at Microsoft Corporation. Phil was awarded the Secretary of Homeland Security's Distinguished Service Medal in June 2011 and the Attorney General's John Marshall Award in July 1999. Phil holds a Bachelor of Engineering in Electrical Engineering and Computer Science, from Vanderbilt University and a JD from Yale Law School. Phil, I am so thrilled to have you with us today. I am glad that we get a chance to talk about it. How the hell did you end up over here with me on this conversation?
I've been looking forward to it for weeks, Tara. Just the opportunity anytime to talk about small businesses is so important because we know that generally at a national level, people always want to talk about critical infrastructure and things like that. And that's important. But the real truth is that the economy runs on small businesses, not only in the US, but around the world. So it's just the most critical conversation one can have.
I completely and totally agree. We're looking at a world where small businesses are increasingly, I wouldn't say they're increasingly being targeted. I would say that the proportion of small businesses that are successfully popped is increasing compared to enterprises. There are really a lot, enterprises kind of have their game in order, but small businesses lack a profound amount of the support and even just the attention that gets them the fixes that they need on time. I think we just saw this last week, small businesses are increasingly getting targeted by cyber attacks, a record number of them. I think it was Security magazine, I think. And I loved your perspective on this as you and I were having a conversation about it. It was this, it was this conversation about sort of the businesses that have been hacked and the businesses that know they've been hacked versus don't know it. And I think to myself about how we think about small business cybersecurity. We keep treating it like it's just a littler enterprise, and they are just different in size, type, and kind. What's the experience that you've seen about this?
Well, I think that's exactly true. To go back to the comment on the article, I think it said 73% of small businesses had suffered a cyber attack. Well, that's not true. It's 100%, and it's true for really any small business. I challenge you to find any small business that hasn't had at least one phishing email a day, even if it never got to them because Google or Microsoft or Verizon or AT&T or somebody, sent it to the bit bucket, trashed it before it got there. The thing I think small businesses need to recognize is that ransomware really changed the economics of the way cyber attacks work. Because before that, you could attack small businesses and, maybe you'd get something out of it. But what ransomware did is make it possible to have attacks at scale. So 100 attacks for $10,000, are just as valuable as one attack for $10 million or whatever it is. I didn't do the math in my head for that one. So because you can monetize those attacks, it meant that automation in attacks, going after small business just changed everything. And so I do think every small business is attacked every day. And what's more, apropos to your audience, the pointing into the spear at protecting them and at trying to get attacks through to them are MSPs, MSSPs, and entities like that. You see with Kaseya breaches, with things like SolarWinds, people are going after the supply chain, and those MSPs and MSSPs are the critical supply chain for small businesses.
Absolutely. I'm thinking right now about Jen Easterly's testimony. I think it was yesterday morning on critical infrastructure, the challenges to national security for the United States when it comes to foreign actors. Jen really pointed out the fact that it is the supply chain in the United States that is the backbone of every part of our procurement process for the DoD, for the federal government, and that ignoring that upstream effect of foreign actor attacks on small businesses and their MSPs, you're just poisoning the well at the source. You're poisoning the river before it ever gets past the stream point, right? It's vital to think about it. And yet at the same time, I think people, when we talk about SolarWinds, and I've talked about SolarWinds both sort of in my capacity as a person who deals with MSPs and small businesses, and also as someone talking to policymakers, there's a lot of people who are policymakers who don't understand that SolarWinds was a service provider for MSPs and small businesses, right? That devastation went way beyond just the contracts it had with the federal government, the Kaseya breaches. Like there's a lot of territory there to cover. It's hard to tell which direction to go, but I'll tell you, the automation thing you're describing right now isn't going to get any easier to defend against given this week's story, which is the mother of all breaches. I love that you brought this one up to me.
Well, the story came out at that a file, a data set, I'll call it, containing 26 billion credentials was leaked. And that's bad enough, right? I will say, you saw this too, I'm sure, Tara. In the industry, we saw change about a decade or so ago where you used to get a lot of password exhaustion attacks, right? And people moved towards password spraying. That is, it was not just randomized. You were getting tested with known username password pairs. And that's what a leak does. It enables people to take those leaked credentials and reuse them and try them in other places. And so a release of 26 million of them is a substantial security risk for anybody who's ever reused a password. And, most people, to be frank, have. And so it's really, it's a key issue. And then when you read the details, it's even more interesting, right? Because it was not theoretically, based on what I read in the story, it wasn't a bad guy, a bad person who leaked this. It was somebody who was putting together the credentials as a commercial service and then misconfigured access to them so they were available to everybody, right? So, I challenge you in some cases to find the breach that's not pure phishing, that doesn't involve a misconfiguration. So, there we go again. Been old wine in new bottles. Been there, seen that.
Well, and I love that you brought up the economics of this earlier, because that's what we're always dealing with is the microeconomics that turn into macroeconomics. The fact that this was, and it wasn't millions, it was billions, 26 billion passwords, right? And identities leaked over this one. And what I love is this, and it's when we say that the billions of passwords that are getting leaked, that they could be tied to single identities, multiple identities. The information that is being leaked because somebody found a market gap someplace, right? If you've got somebody who's putting together a file like this, it's because it's cheaper for them to work with it in this way, whether it's time or money. So that's what we really see with ransomware, with BEC. People are going to attack systems, not just in the coolest, niftiest way. They're going to do it in the cheapest way, right? It's why the most powerful question we often ask small business employees as they come aboard our process is your home and work email password different? It's an incredibly powerful question to ask people. And it's because of this, the economics at scale of attacking systems. Somebody's going to get popped with this leak eventually. And it's just going to be, the cheapest way to do it, not the coolest.
That's absolutely right. So we did some work with a company called Tidal Cyber, over the summer, released into the fall. So we said, right now, the big problem out there for at least small businesses is ransomware. So we worked with them to look at what are the most common attack families for ransomware that hit small businesses, and what are the techniques that those families use. Then we looked at, if you take basic cyber hygiene, basic things like not reusing passwords, stronger authentication, keeping your systems up to date, how effective is that at protecting you against ransomware? And the analysis was pretty interesting. Basic cyber hygiene blocks about 86% of the initial attack access vectors that ransomware uses against small business, and about 72% of the attacks generally. So what does that say? It says, hygiene matters a lot. Doing the basics solves most of your problem. And so, solving most of your problem, does it solve all your problem? No. But, one thing I like to say when I talk to small businesses or talk to individual users is you can do this, right? You've just got to do something. And then in that successful, do something else. So, it's even easier if you use an MSP or an MSSP and they're doing the right thing. So talk to them, make sure they're doing the right thing, and then, buy the service you need to get the hygiene covered.
I love it. I'm gonna riff off the fact that you just used something that we often describe in cybersecurity as cyber hygiene, which is kind of those actions you take on an everyday basis to keep yourself healthy, and tell you something that is just devastating. This is, I believe it was today it was Des Moines, Iowa, reported that an orthopedic surgeons group just got popped. This one is devastating. These are some folks who apparently lost everything: customer data, financial data, patient information, doctor's notes, everything. Our good friend and colleague James Byerly described it to me this morning when he passed me this information as they got stripped down to the Ethernet cables in the carpet. So this is just a devastating attack, and because it was based around a problem with cyber hygiene, I can't even make a joke about it at this point right now. And I'm pretty capable of making bad puns when they pop right up into my face right here. There's not even a joke to be had here. This is just the continuing devastation of people who are being targeted by actors with time and economies of scale that they are just not able to probabilistically defend against. Can any one person change the course of their business's cybersecurity future? Sure. But can the entire subsegment of small businesses in the United States change what's happening to them right now across the board? Absolutely not. There is just not the resources to do it. So I actually want to ask you, Phil, to tell me a little bit about what GCA does, how it's addressing some of these problems, not just in the US, but as a truly global organization. How are you advocating for these small businesses, people just trying to keep us safe and healthy?
Thanks, Tara. So I've been doing this for roughly 30 years. And, the thing that I've probably gotten most frustrated with in the course of my career led to one of the things I'm better known for, which is saying I've been in this meeting before. I got tired of going to meetings and saying, things like small business cybersecurity, that's a problem. Oh, well, what are we going to do about that? Well, our metric is we had a good meeting. We discussed the problem and we went away. What do we do about it? Bupkis. So GCA is about really not doing bupkis. It's about trying to take practical measures that will work at scale. The big problem on the internet is, to my mind, not critical infrastructure, it's scale. The fact that we've got so many people using so many devices around the world and they're all internet connected. And how do you fix that, right? And that's where, again, the pointing into the spear are individuals and small businesses who have the least capability to manage that. So we try to work on that. We have two primary ways of working. We like to work with communities to sort of provide bottom-up solutions that people and users can adopt to make themselves more secure. The best example there is the GCA cybersecurity toolkits. So we have 5 cybersecurity toolkits, all of which are available at gcatoolkit.org, one for individuals, one for small businesses, one for elections officials, one for journalists, and one for mission-based organizations. And they're all intended to help small entities do the basics, use strong authentication, patch their systems, back up their systems, covering the things that really will work at scale. And how do we work at that around the world? Well, the small business toolkit's available in 6 different languages: English, French, Spanish, German, Portuguese and Bahasan, because Bahasan is the language of Indonesia, and we did a special project to deploy the small business toolkit in Indonesia. The other thing we do is we try to work with infrastructure owners and operators to provide solutions that will work at scale. Things like protective DNS services, providing information on malicious domains that they can use to, for example, block or watch for bad things happening. Studying traffic that come off network so that all organizations can do a better job. You know, if people like Google and Microsoft make small changes, everybody benefits. And I will say, you know, to this day, I think the most important thing that's happened in cybersecurity in the last 10 years was that Google on Gmail and Microsoft on Outlook turned on multi-factor authentication by default. That's done. You know, that's the biggest thing that could have happened.
The fact that I was able to not just know what you were about to say, but literally echo your words as you're saying them means that this is not an uncommonly held view among cybersecurity professionals, right? The fact that we both turned on multi-factor authentication by default, that right there is an incredibly powerful tool. And that small tweak, shifting over from not having it be enabled by default, making you have to opt out of the secure measure instead of opt into it, is a really powerful nudge behavior that we see work again and again. I would also argue, and this is a little off the topic of small businesses, but I would argue that the TLS everywhere, the HTTPS everywhere project by all the major browsers to by default encrypt web pages in transit and data in transit has also done a huge amount of heavy lifting behind the scenes in keeping people's data private at scale. I think it's an incredibly impact, and that's part of the reason you do the DNS work you do too.
Yeah. The other thing I'd flag is, you know, the service providers have a huge role to play here. Well, what do I mean by that? I won't name the organization, but I was involved in one project a while ago where we were using a service provider that didn't provide multi-factor authentication, and it stored sensitive data. And I talked to other people. I actually reached out to the CISO of the organization and said, we can't do this if you're not going to have 2FA. Wasn't in their plan. So it was such the nature of the project that we couldn't get rid of that entirely, but we moved all the sensitive data off that platform. We actually started using another process because we didn't have the option based on our existing IT infrastructure to use multi-factor authentication to protect sensitive data. And I think for organizations that have sensitive data, that's just not a risk you can afford to take anymore. So kudos to your customers and listeners that are enabling their people, their customers, to use multi-factor authentication, because it's the most important thing you can do.
I completely and totally agree. It's profoundly important, and it's the only way to solve the fact that human beings are going to behave in pretty predictable ways. They're going to reuse passwords, right? And that doesn't mean they're bad. It means they have a different set of skills than you and I do have, Phil. And that's I think part of the reason we are part of this. At this point in kind of the conversation, I can kind of tell it's gonna go one of two ways. I think I'm on this call with you, and that you and I are talking right now because, yeah, you're famous for saying I've been in this meeting before, and I think I have seen this again and again, that at a certain point in information security, we get to a point where we go, I am so tired of having people make the same mistakes again and again, or I'm so tired of seeing companies cause people to make these same mistakes again and again, or the underlying behavioral elements of this. You either get to a point where you're like, oh, I got to fix the infrastructural problems and the company incentives, or you go, I hate people, and I'm just going to play World of Warcraft from this point on, right? And I feel like there's a joy that comes with understanding that these problems are systemic, and it's not a person's fault, right? So it is no one's fault.
I wrote this article for Lawfare a few years ago that was responding to a friend of mine, Paul Rosenzweig's view that he wrote a piece about how, you know, people really didn't care that much about cybersecurity. And I said, well, I don't think that's wrong. I think people do care. They just don't know what to do. And in point of fact, most of the time, they're never going to know what to do. It's too complicated. What do we ask people to do to drive safely, to have their cars in check, right? We ask them to change the oil, to do periodic maintenance, to buckle their seatbelt, and then just drive safely, follow the rules of the road. Do we ask them to periodically, do we ask them to like monitor for threats and change everything they do? No, it's a very simple thing. Teenagers do it. Elderly people do it. But we ask them, I remember back in the 90s getting these pop-ups from like Windows 95 that said, do you want to run process XYZ 2025, right? I mean, I'm a cybersecurity professional. I don't know how to answer that question. So what I said in the article on Lawfare is we've got to stop trying to teach people to fish in cybersecurity, and we just got to give them food. They're not farmers, they're eaters. And there's really no reason why they should be cybersecurity farmers. That's not to say we're not asking them to do the basics, right? Know how to use the knife and fork, put the garbage out. But really, you don't need to know how to grow a crop anymore. You buy that at the grocery store. So that goes to your second point. We've got to stop making it possible for people to make mistakes, because we know they will make mistakes because they're people.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there's also the element of kind of trusted information and the system we live in, right? We've got to make it impossible for people to not have an element of multi-factor authentication, because that is just, as we know, by far the best way to keep people safe. And on a personal level, and I mean an individual level, we have to make it so that the information that a human being absolutely must have is available and ready to them and can be checked on and can be something they can use as a resource. Frankly, Phil, I don't like doing our taxes. I'm not a fan of it, right? Like we're still below 49 people. And that means that we're a small business. We're just like everybody else in this country who's a small business, which means that I've got a whole bunch of tax paperwork I have to sign off on every single year, right? And I'm legally, personally, a fiduciary of this company, the fiduciary of this company. I have to sign off on all of this. I'm here to tell you I don't understand IRS tax regulations. And I shouldn't have to. I have a service provider who comes to me and says, here's the setup that you got this year. I say to this person, give me my tax forms for this year. And they say, okay, here they are. Here's the stuff you need to fix. Let's have you log into QuickBooks. You're going to check this. You're going to look at this. All right, good. We've been maintaining it over the course of the year. Boop, we can print you off, right? That's the process that I understand. And it is the mix between me being responsible and me needing to know something that is not my damn job. I don't want to learn the tax code. Please don't make me learn the tax code. And I can only imagine the number of people that must feel the same way in cybersecurity. They're already busy running companies. They do what they're doing. And yet this is so embedded in American life, in everybody's life at this point, the need to have cyber controls over your data and your accounts. I mean, what's the situation you've seen that has been the most sort of just like head scratchingly crazy between the expectations on an organization and their actual ability to handle those expectations for cybersecurity?
Well, I don't want to point fingers at friends in government, but there have been some really interesting things that have happened. Like it still annoys me when, people in government or even industry will go out and say, we want you as a small business to do this extensive risk management survey, or we're interested in supply chain security. So here's a list of 700 questions we want you to answer on your information security protocols. That kind of just pisses me off. And the reason it does is the small businesses don't even know how to answer those questions for the most part. And if they do, they're going to have to give the answers that they think the person wants. The person sending them the questionnaire knows that. They fully know that. They don't expect any change in behavior. They just want a set of questions that said they did due diligence. And if there's a bad thing to happen, that they can go after the small business and say, you lied here. You didn't tell the truth, so we don't have to pay. You've got to pay, right? So it's this paper exercise that makes nobody more secure. It's just ridiculous. Instead of asking, whether or not a small business is, secured its hypervisor and, all this other stuff, just ask them if they've turned on two-factor authentication. You do the basics. Are they patching their systems? What does their security vendor, like somebody like, BitSight or Security Scorecard, say about what we see in their external profile? What does their service provider like Red Queen say about, doing the basic cyber? What does it look like you are? Where are you? That's the sort of thing. Knowing that you're at a 5 or a D instead of a 9 or an A. That's the kind of things that you can actually manage as a business. That is, in fact, the risk management that you want to do. The risk management you don't want to do is figure out whether you want NIST Cybersecurity Framework Control 3.2.7.AB1. Let's not ask people to do the things that they are ill-equipped to do, and it will not make anybody safer. That's what annoys me the most. I get passionate.
Yeah, I got so pissed off over this. I started a whole goddamn company over it. Okay. Like, this is literally what got me so angry, and this is a righteous anger, right? Because you look at the situation, you go, this isn't going to get better. So the origin story of how we ended up building this product specifically to help managed service providers work with their small businesses cybersecurity, their clients cybersecurity, is because I got a phone call from a friend in November 2021, and she runs a recruiting company, 30 odd people, and she was trying to sell to a FANG company. And she got back the vendor assessment checklist for just her company, 10 full-time, 20 contractors maybe. And the vendor assessment process she had to go through was 51 pages with probably about 400 questions on it, asking her questions. And, I'm on the phone with her, and she said, I have no idea how anybody could possibly sell to this company. Should I just go through and check all the boxes that I think are the ones that they want? And then can I send them to you and see if this is all true? I think that's a lot of what happens.
And you see this in government too. Like people may have heard about, things like CMMC, which is a requirement or will be a requirement to sell things to DoD. Why is that so long for small businesses? Why is it, are you managing for risk? Do you have a strategy around strong authentication? Why is it not, have you turned on two-factor authentication? Why can't we scale and ask questions that are important? Because, the federal government actually for itself, right, through the Department of Homeland Security, through the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, has created at least a small list of must-dos, right? Things
the
that
CPGs.
are binding operational directives, right? So we know, this is not like, well, we need to do a risk assessment. Everybody's got to do this. It doesn't matter what your view of your risk is. Everybody's got to do these things. You got to turn on DMARC, for example. So why don't we just ask small businesses to do those same things and make that a requirement of contracting with the government, and not ask these, look, if you're working on a Pentagon project, I get it. Nobody wants, the target HVAC vendor to leak the F-28 data. Got that part, right? Supply chain matters a lot. But is the step you're taking actually going to do bupkis to help that? And if not, then one, make requirements that will require them to do what they need to do, or require that they use an identified service provider that'll do all of that for them, or most of that for them. We've got to think about scale. And questionnaires do not scale. People do not scale. What scales is services and products that are configured from the start to give people what they need. Like you said, an accountant that does everybody's taxes scales at least some, because they've got the expertise and the tools to do things on a basis that's far cheaper than you. We just have to use that same approach. And we've known that for 25 years, and we haven't done anything about it.
I strongly agree. And it's not just those 700 checklist items that get sent to small businesses so they can enter into any supply chain and just survive at this point. It's also that it's a waste of damn time to do it one time and not maintain it in a continuous sense. That's part of the reason why we do what we do and maintain these questionnaires, these checklists, these frameworks over time. Like NIST CSF, like Ballard Cyber Agency, and this gets fun. This gets to be the fun part, like the Global Cyber Alliance's Small Business Toolkit on an ongoing basis now. That's the fun part about today is it's not just doing the checklist. It's keeping it up over time in a meaningful way that lets people address a control or two at a time so that they can stay up to date. That's the salvation here, because nobody's got the capacity and energy to do this every single week on an ongoing basis. Instead, you've got to break it down, you've got to make it human readable, and you have to make it something that is managed and maintained and scalable, because you cannot hit people inside small businesses with these complicated questions and expect them to just all of a sudden know what to do. Instead, they've got to work with service providers who can translate and work with them on their relationship basis using some form of product that helps them maintain continuous compliance. That's just the answer. So, Phil, this is the part I get to say something really fun, which is that we have just implemented the Global Cyber Alliance's Small Business Toolkit for Cybersecurity. I am thrilled about this. What this means is if you go to the gcatoolkit.org site, the one that we just pulled up a little earlier today, and you take a look at those frameworks, the one for small businesses is now owned and operational inside Red Queen. You can take a look at it, and I'll have Ian throw it up here for us in just a second and show us what it looks like. So Ian, yeah, throw that up there for us. You can take a look at what it looks like to maintain your compliance with the GCA Small Business Toolkit over time. This is what's so important, because you could do this checklist once, but as a small business owner, I am here to tell you that I have the attention span of a damn gnat at this point. I've got 3 5-minute problems happening simultaneously all day long, right? And this is the challenge that we knew we wanted to try to address, was get this MSP and small business world to a place where they could manage and maintain continuous compliance. So these GCA toolkit questions about malware, questions about multi-factor authentication, about asset inventory. These are the questions that matter for small business. This is what Phil's mad about. So I was like, I got a present for you. And so if you want to throw the GCA site back up again, I really want to point people to this resource, not just that we have it available among our other frameworks, but note that the Global Cyber Alliance has offered these toolkits for free, and we also promise to do so forever. We're never going to charge any kind of price for businesses using the GCA Small Business Toolkit or any of the other ones that we might end up implementing in future as well too. I'm looking forward to getting a chance to see how small businesses can take sensible security information and start really using it. It's meaningful and thoughtful the way that GCA put this together, and we're really proud to become a collaborator and a partner in this process with you folks. Thank you.
I'd say a couple things. First off, I don't know if you know it, but you told a very funny joke there for people in our industry. You said you have the attention span of a gnat, and you said G-N-A-T, but I thought N-A-T. Since I know you're a router for people, for those who don't know, NAT is network address translation. It's
NAT tables.
What all routers do when they connect you to the internet for the most part. The other thing is funny. It's just so important to focus on these basics. So I will offer a piece of advice, and some of my friends in the computer security industry will be annoyed at this. If you have a consultant that says, yes, you need more security, we recommend a pen test, then think long and hard about that. Because my advice to, if you're a small business, this is not true for Raytheon. This is not true for Amazon. It's not true for Microsoft, right? But if you're a small business and you have $1,000 to spend on cybersecurity, spend it on continuous monitoring of your posture. And don't do a pen test, right? Because I could right now, I could look at your web-facing infrastructure and what I know about your company, and I could probably write 99% of a pen test for you without even testing anything. Because I know there are going to be holes, and I know I'm going to get in, right? But if you do the basics, if you monitor the basics, one day of monitoring where you have a vulnerability appear in one of your internet-facing web applications, and fixing that in a day is going to save you far more money than a pen test ever would, because that's going to be found and it's going to be attacked. So, the federal government, as much as I like to run them down, I spent 15 years there, so I feel authorized, right? But they've gone to continuous monitoring and policy compliance for a long time. Continuous monitoring for compliance with the things you need to do, and looking specifically both for policy and technical compliance gets you so far. It's not a silver bullet. There is no silver bullet here, but it's a lead bullet. And a lead bullet will kill things but werewolves. And so it's a pretty good technology for staying, safe from monsters that are not immune.
Well, and I love the point of managing and maintaining continuous compliance. I often ask that question. If you've got $10 a month, $10 a year, $100 a year, $1,000 a year, what do you do for security, right? And right about at that point, that $1,000 a year point, that's right. Right about there is where you monitor and you manage your continuous compliance with some of the best practices in information security. And that pen test point is so on point. The reason why is a substantial chunk of our customers are firms that do security, MSSPs, pen testing firms, and stuff like that. That the next thing that happens after their clients go get their pen test is they look at it and they go, "Okay, this is great. What do we do now?" And the pen test company says, "Well, you got your pen test report. Go fix all of this stuff." And you know what happens? You know what happens, Phil? Right that minute. It's drawered, and then the next year I show up on their desktop again and I find the exact same damn agent I left there last year when I was cracking in. I mean, I have a history in this industry as well too, and I see the same flaws repeated year after year because the process of fixing these things has got to be more digestible and understandable and at the level of the business that needs these fixes. So that's the reason, honestly, that a lot of companies that do this kind of offensive security work end up bringing us around, because we're just a process to fix each one of those little things piece by piece, right? So that's when I look at this and I go, we keep doing the same thing and expecting different behavior out of people. We keep running pen tests every year because that's what's supposed to happen on the checklist. And we keep thinking that it's going to make a difference. And I think that I'm annoyed by people that don't understand that humans are going to human, and that I'm not going to call it the last mile problem, but there is no getting away from the fact that you have to engage with people when it comes to information security at every organization that you work with. There's no escape from it. And you figure out a way to take joy in it and operate in a way that helps people, or you just give up, move to the basement, download Skyrim.
There are times in my life where the wilds of Montana and a solar generator that's not connected to the internet, I think about that, but I haven't gone there yet.
Yeah, I've got a Norwegian A-frame flat pack house like in my head right now with like the solar paneling on either side and like a heat pump. I was envisioning like maybe breeding green beans and dealing with like the Himalayan blackberry spread. North Cascades, someplace. Yeah, that sounds pretty good right about now. And at the same time, this is a world we actually get to make better, and I'm just privileged and thrilled by that. So I want to ask you, Phil, before I move to a question that I always ask everybody, is there anything else? You almost sort of brought it up right now, and I've asked this a few times, but is there anything else that you would say to not managed service providers, but to small businesses in the US who feel unheard, left behind, not included in the discussions, the big policy discussions around cybersecurity always happening in the Senate and stuff like that? How do you make them feel heard? What would you say to those folks?
Well, I'd say a couple of things. And the first thing is actually both for small businesses and MSSPs, which is, I'd love to hear more from them about what would make them more effective. What are approaches that would work for them? Because this is something, we're specifically thinking about in GCA right now. We love this toolkit. It's great, right? And our best way of getting it out there is through people who work with customers to help deployment, like Red Queen Dynamics. But what would be the next step? What would Toolkit 3.0 be? How can we get things even more automatic? How can we get things more usable? What would make a difference to small businesses so that they'd want to, maybe to the extent they have to write a check, even a small one, write a small check? What would MSPs and MSSPs think, would be in their business sense to offer the suite of services that people need? in order to comply? Is there something that could be done on either a technical or a policy level, whether that's a standard for cyber hygiene or a safe harbor? Those are all questions that I think we need to get to. And we're happy to talk about doing things on a policy level or doing things on a technical level, because we build tools and we talk to people too. Arguably, the biggest single thing we've ever done is we were deeply involved in the decision of the U.S. government to deploy DMARC, which is an email anti-phishing protocol on a cross-government-wide basis. That has a huge effect. So love to hear from small businesses and from MSSPs about what they need, what help they could have. And I'd say, just stay active. Your voice is in, the importance of your voice is recognized by a number of people. We just all need to be able to continue to hear it easily. It's a challenge of the modern environment that the people who cut checks are most listened to in the political process. But that doesn't mean they're the only people who are speaking. And for example, we speak. You speak, right? When I talk to people in Congress or the administration, I say, love what you're doing on critical infrastructure. Great stuff. What about small businesses? What are you doing for them? And we've got a web page up that talks about this, that, or the other thing. That's not a solution, right? That doesn't scale. So what are you doing? And I'd love to be able to continue to work with MSPs, MSSPs, and small businesses to make those voices heard.
I've got a question for you in a LinkedIn DM right now. An MSP owner would like to know when you're going to put up your managed service and managed security service provider toolkit. Bill?
So would you please reach out to me?
Got it.
We talked about doing that very thing and haven't gotten a lot of traction. Because the challenge for us is, the MSPs, look, they're businesses. They need to make money doing this, right? So what we've got to figure out is what's the right model for our intervention to make it more feasible for MSPs and MSSPs to make money in this space. So like building a toolkit, would that really help you? I mean, it would probably be more an integration of services that you've got already. I think we'd be happy to do that if that would be effective. But, the truth of the matter is there's different management products you could use. One of the things we're thinking about is, do we need a global cyber hygiene standard that says, here are the basics of cyber hygiene, so that a managed service provider, and then you could have a scheme that says this set of products do that, right? So a managed service provider say, I provide compliance with, this version, right? But now we've got Cyber Essentials, we've got versions in the US. There's no traction. So we're trying to think through what that is. If somebody wants a managed service provider toolkit, I'd love to talk to them. I'd love to find out what we could do about that and whether that makes sense.
I am so glad to hear it. All right. On that note, I am having a great time. I'm going to ask you, Phil, this is the last question we always ask everybody. We already started to touch on it with this whole retreat to the wilds of Montana. And this is the question. If you didn't do this job, and I've had answers from ship's captain to blacksmith to astronaut, but if you weren't doing this job and you could do anything else, and within reason, money was no object, you got to do what you love for a living, what's the other job you would have right now? The one you think about doing instead of this one?
I'd probably be a developer. I went to, I don't want to age myself too much, right? But I went to engineering school at Vanderbilt before the internet was really out there. It was in the early 1980s. And then I went to law school right away, and I started doing stuff and getting into more policy. And I've always loved that. But if I had to say anything I did, I was a really good programmer. My senior project in college was I wrote a full, you might not remember the language Forth, but it was an interpreted language. I wrote a Forth interpreter in 6502 assembly code.
Nerd. I love
I
it.
really enjoyed that. It ran on a Commodore 64, and it fully worked. I wrote my demonstration program was I wrote the game of life
Conway,
into fourth
beautiful.
assembly, and I ran it for the class. And I would have probably been completely happy and a lot less frazzled and stressed if I had never gone into cybersecurity and I was just out there, writing code. I might be more affluent too, but that's the thing that I would be doing. I'd go back and I'd be a programmer.
Saving the world doesn't pay really well, brother. Phil, this is just a joyful conversation. If you don't have any last thoughts, any last thoughts for the folks here? Anything you want to tell them?
The one thing I just flagged for people, this is probably not a big issue for your audience, but the organizations like GCA that do what we do, and there's some that are super, even much more important, right? The nonprofits and the volunteer organizations that really keep the internet running, those are all sort of funded on a shoestring, and it's hand to mouth for about everybody. We've got a workshop in Washington, D.C. at the National Press Club a little later this month on February 26th and 27th to sort of start to explore what are models, right? Because what we've got on the internet is, we've got a highway system, but we rely on, Jimmys and Joes and Janes driving around in pickup trucks with some asphalt in the back to fill potholes. And they're not paid. And, they run out of time to do it. That's no real way to run a railroad. So we're trying to figure out ways to sort of resource those people to keep everybody safe. And so if any of you are interested in that, the workshop is open to register. You can find out more at commongoodcyber.org. So it's commongoodcyber.org. And love to have people go to it and share your thoughts, register if you want to be there, and help with the problem as we go forward.
I am incredibly glad to hear that. This is going to be an amazing event. If I recall correctly, I think you've just announced that Kemba Walden is going to be one of your keynote speakers at that. Absolutely amazing event. So folks, definitely take a look at that. I saw that on LinkedIn. Looks absolutely amazing. So thanks you so much, Phil. Folks, for those who are in the Seattle area, please do reach out to me because later on this month as well, we are going to be doing an in-person meetup for the first time in the Seattle area for our MSP and MSSP folks that want to hang out and have a good time and maybe complain a little bit. This is completely new to this crowd, I know. Everybody, what a pleasure and a joy it was to have Phil Reitinger of the Global Cyber Alliance here with us today. We are proud and honored to be able to bring the Small Business Cybersecurity Toolkit to Red Queen, and we look forward to keeping you folks all safe in the future. Phil, thank you so very much. Again, everyone, what a great pleasure. Have a wonderful week. We'll see you soon.
Take care.